What is the most creepy, unexplained event that has happened in your life? Story 1. Weirdest thing I've ever experienced. I live in a small mountain town, and it takes 3 hours and 4 mountain passes to get to the nearest city. Pre-COVID, I made that drive 2 to 3 times a month over a period of 10 years. I pretty much had the curves and climbs committed to memory. One night, I was making the drive at 2 a.m. to catch an early flight, cruising the curves and enjoying the lack of semi-trucks. Left curve, right curve. I knew there was a big sweeping curve to the left coming up, when all of a sudden I was driving on a straight road. I was well aware there wasn't a straight section on that highway for another 30 miles. So immediately I started looking around trying to figure out where I was. Not a single highway sign on the side of the road. I smacked myself a few times to make sure I hadn't fallen asleep. My phone had no service, but that was normal, so I couldn't check my location. Looking out the window, I realized the high desert scrub trees had been replaced with a thick forest. Imagine your headlights picking up dark, heavy forest, so dense you can't see 10 feet ahead. It looked like something from the Pacific Northwest, which we definitely don't have here. I kept checking the clock, and for 15 minutes, I drove on that straight road through this ominous, dark forest when I should have been on a curvy mountain pass in the desert. Right about the time I was going to have a full-on panic attack, that sweeping left curve reappeared, and I was back in the scrub. I chalked it up to drowsy driving and an overactive imagination until IT happened again. 2 years later, same spot, except this time I wasn't alone. My brother was riding shotgun on a similar airport run, and all of a sudden we were on that same straight road. That time it only lasted about 5 minutes before my brother looked around and asked, "Where the heck are we?" Cue the sweeping left curve appearing again, and we were back in the desert, even though I still can't explain it. I'm grateful I had a witness. Story 2. My uncle used to have a cabin in the woods near Winter, Wisconsin, on a relatively undeveloped arm of the Chippewa flowage. Not too remote, you could still pop into town for necessities, but far enough in the boonies that, if you got hurt, you'd be in serious trouble. I used to spend time there in the summer, tearing through the woods with my 2 cousins. One morning when I was about 10, my uncle woke us up abruptly and said it was time to go fishing. It was still super early, and we were all confused because it was pitch dark. And who went fishing that early anyway? He hustled us down to the dock where he kept his little fishing boat and quickly launched us into the water, away from the house. At this point, we were all starting to feel uneasy. We thought maybe we were being punished. The previous morning, my uncle had gone to chop wood and couldn't find his axe anywhere. He had left it lodged in a stump next to the cabin and accused us of messing with it, which, fair enough, sounded like something we might have done. He ended up having to drive into town to buy a new one, but he wasn't talking. We just sat shivering under a blanket at the bow of the boat, while my uncle stared wild-eyed at the shoreline, waving a flashlight nervously ahead of us. Eventually, we arrived at my uncle's friend's cabin across the lake and tumbled inside. Our uncle sent us up to the loft to sleep, and he and his buddy locked the doors and left, not returning until well after sunrise. Later, our uncle came back with the truck and trailer already packed with all our gear and told us it was time to go home. We thought it was weird that we were leaving days early, but we were kids, so we just went along. Our uncle stayed quiet the entire long drive back to civilization. Years later, he finally confided that the reason he hustled us home was because he'd woken up around 3 a.m. to a strange thok, thok, thok sound outside the cabin. When he went out to investigate, a massive jack pine fell directly across the narrow driveway, blocking us in. Startled by the noise, he swept his flashlight along the tree line, just in time to see a man holding an axe slip away into the darkness. He and his buddy had to take turns chainsawing the tree apart, while the other stood watch with a rifle. He never found the missing axe. Story 3. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend. He had a doctor's appointment and brought his dad with him. It was in another town about an hour away, and since the appointment was for 11 a.m., they left at 9:30 to give themselves plenty of time. They pulled into the parking lot at 10:30. My friend said he remembered checking the clock in the car when they arrived, even remarking to his dad that they made good time. They went into the office, and the receptionist pointed out that they were a little late, but it was fine because the doctor was running behind. My friend told her that he had an 11 o'clock appointment and that he was actually a half hour early. She then pointed to the clock on the waiting room wall, which said 11:15. His dad checked his watch, 11:15. My friend ran out and checked the clock in the car. 11:15, somehow in the few dozen steps from the car to the office. They had lost 45 minutes. When they got home, my friend's mom verified they had left at 9:30, and there hadn't been heavy traffic or any delays. It remains a mystery to this day. Story 4. I was driving through rural areas in New England, near the borders of Vermont and Massachusetts, so I'm not sure exactly which state I was in. It was late, well, so late that it was actually early, and the fog was dense, like Silent Hill level dense, and like a cliché horror movie character, I was driving on back roads. First, one of my headlights went out. I couldn't use high beams because of the fog. I was in the middle of nowhere and hadn't seen a house or town in a long time. Then the car started making noise and the check engine light came on. So I pulled over. There was nothing much around, just field, fog, and darkness. It was creepy as anything. I took a look at the engine, even though I'm better with electronics than engines. I tightened what I could, but now the car wouldn't start. So I was alone, in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. And of course, my phone had no service. One big cliché, but I wasn't dumb enough to start walking around in those conditions. So I reclined the seat and decided to nap for a few hours until sunrise. I woke up as the sun was coming up and the fog was clearing, and I was parked on the main street of a tiny town, right in front of something that looked like the Bates Motel house. There were houses everywhere. I was sure I had pulled over in the woods, and not one light had been on in any of the houses all night. There was a service station just 50 yards up the road. I walked over and talked to the guy, who looked completely normal. He came over, asked me to try starting the car, and it started immediately. Both headlights were working again too. I drove away, never got the name of the little village, and couldn't find it on any map. It always felt like the setup for a horror movie that just didn't happen. Story 5. One time when I was younger, I was upstairs in my room playing games on a PlayStation. I was home alone because both of my parents had gone out to see a movie. It was a fairly normal night with nothing out of the ordinary happening, until I heard an extremely loud crashing noise and what sounded like glass shattering coming from the kitchen area. I immediately went downstairs to try and find the source of the noise. I checked all of the windows, and they showed no signs of damage. Confused, I kept walking around, trying to figure out where the loud crash had come from, until I reached the kitchen. I don't know how this happened, but somehow the outer glass screen of our oven had completely fallen off and shattered. Slightly terrified, I swept up all the glass and threw it away. I tried explaining the situation to my parents when they got home, but they didn't believe me and grounded me for a week because they thought I broke it. To this day, I still have no clue what caused the oven's glass door to shatter like that, and it remains one of the biggest unexplained mysteries in my life. Story 6. My dad and stepmother got married when I was 10 years old at a countryside estate that now serves as a wedding venue. The other kids and I were playing hide and seek in this massive house, every kid's dream, when my sister, 12 at the time, was chasing our younger cousin, 7 at the time, who had long blonde hair and was wearing a blue dress, down a long hallway. Halfway down the hallway, the younger cousin darted into this old spiral staircase that only goes up about a quarter rotation before it's blocked off by a wall. My sister jumped around the corner and shouted, "Gotcha!" Except nobody was in the blocked staircase. She ran back to our dad crying, saying our cousin had disappeared through a wall. Everyone laughed it off because our cousin was standing right there next to her. Fast forward 5 years, I was 15 and got a job as a waiter at the same wedding venue. The estate had an orangery where they held the ceremonies, and I noticed a small stained glass window depicting a blonde-haired girl in a blue dress, with the dates 1931 to 1937 underneath. Naturally, I was dumbfounded, so I asked the venue manager about it. She told me that after being sold by the original owner, the estate was once a boarding school for girls. She said a young girl had tragically fallen out of a top-floor window and passed away. The hallway where my sister chased our cousin was actually an old servant's hallway, and the staircase led directly up to the old girls' dormitories on the top floor. Spooky. I learned a lot about the house during my 5 years working there. Nothing else truly paranormal, but plenty of things that were very, very interesting. Story 7. I work for a funeral company. One afternoon, I prepared a viewing for a man whose funeral was scheduled for the next day. Usually, at the end of the day, we return the bodies to the refrigeration unit. But because we had been really busy, and this was a small branch, our fridge was full. On rare occasions, if the deceased has been embalmed, we'll leave them in the chapel with the air conditioner turned all the way up. We have good security systems, and honestly, who would break into a funeral home anyway? The next morning, I was the first one in. I walked into the chapel, and the man was out of his coffin, lying face down on the floor. Not sprawled out, but perfectly neat, like he had floated up out of the coffin, turned face down, and floated back to the ground. Obviously, I was shocked. My first thought was that someone had broken in and done it, or that it was some kind of prank by a staff member, but it would have been a serious offense. Nobody I work with would ever do that, and what's more, we have security cameras, motion detectors, and swipe cards to track who comes and goes. But there was nothing according to the system. No one entered or left the building that night. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we don't have cameras in the chapel itself. And if you're thinking the man wasn't really deceased, keep in mind I don't work in a developing country. He was embalmed. You don't survive embalming. So yeah, it turned into a full investigation, and no one could explain how he ended up like that. To this day, it gives me chills every time I enter that chapel. Story 8. A buddy picked me up to hit a couple of bars, have a few drinks, and just hang out. Everything was fine. I had a nice little buzz going. Around 11 p.m., I went outside to smoke a cigar. Then, boom, I woke up the next morning at home. In my bed, I don't recall even leaving the bar, let alone how I got home. I had multiple missed calls from my buddy. When I called him, he said I had just vanished. The creepy part is what happened after the call. I went to the bathroom and realized, somehow, during whatever happened that night, I had received a haircut and someone had shaved my face. Weird, right? But it gets stranger. As I was finishing up in the bathroom, I noticed something else. During the time I was missing, someone had groomed my private areas as well. With expert precision, not a single missed hair, nick, or cut. To this day, I have no idea what happened, but when I shared the story with other friends, a few of them said they'd spotted me at different bars throughout the night, before the haircut, and I was alone every time. Story 9. Ever since I was a kid, I believed my childhood home was haunted. I'm more of a skeptic now, but strange things always happened in that house. The most memorable was when I was about 5 or 6 years old and woke up in the middle of the night to see a woman hanging in the center of my bedroom. She was suspended by a chain, and her neck looked injured from it. She seemed to be in her teens and had a very dirty, grimy appearance. I remember it vividly because it terrified me. I blinked and she was gone. Everything seemed normal again. Strange things would continue to happen during the night. Back then, we were a functional family and would eat dinner together, stacking our plates in the sink to soak overnight so my mom could wash them in the morning. In the middle of the night, we would randomly hear the porcelain plates topple over in the sink. Some even broke. It used to keep me up at night, but after a while I got used to it. You would constantly feel like you were being watched. When I was around 15, I saw a large shadow figure standing in the corner of my room, whispering to itself. That really freaked me out. A few months later, in the same bedroom, I was trying to sleep when I suddenly felt weight pressing into the bed around me, like someone was crawling in next to me. Of course, no one was there. A few months after that, while pulling an all-nighter in the kitchen, I heard someone whisper directly into my ear. I spun around, fists up. No one there. Things got worse after my parents moved to their farm. I had to move back into the house because life wasn't going well. I was in the house alone. I would hear extremely loud bangs and crashes with no evidence of anything being out of place. With most of the furniture gone, there wasn't much in the house that could have made those noises. It slowly began to affect me mentally. I'd hear something and turn toward it and say things like, "Would you shut up?" Or "Could you not?" Needless to say, that house had a very negative impact on me. It nearly led to me making a permanent decision a few years ago. Thankfully, I've since moved out, gotten help, and never looked back. My life is much better now. Story 10. About 10 years ago, I was sitting in my room when I heard my doorknob slowly turning. I thought it was my dad checking to see if I was napping, trying to be quiet. I watched the knob turn and heard the springs in the mechanism squeaking, then the sound of the latch sliding off the metal plate as the door pushed open a bit. I sat up to greet my dad and ask what he needed, except I didn't see anyone. Then the door moved again, like it had been pushed further open. That's when I clearly saw my dad, sitting in the living room on the couch. It was such a strange experience that I wrote down the time and exactly what happened. I didn't keep a diary or anything like that. I just couldn't explain it. The door had been fully shut and latched properly. If anything, the air kicking on or another door opening would have sucked it closed, not opened it. That had happened many times before. At the same time, I had been seeing a shadow figure peering around my doorframe. It was about 6 feet tall, solid black. All my family members are under 5 feet 7 inches and very fair-skinned, and the wall space from doorframe to corner was only about 3 inches. No one could physically fit there. This figure would just lean in and out of view, staring at me while I lay in bed. Story 11. Shared this once before, but I have one of these stories too. About 10 years ago, back in high school, I was driving my dad's old 88 S10 to work on a back road in my hometown. Along that road, there's a house with a bunch of chickens that roam the yard. On this particular day, they were all on the side of the road, and one of them darted out just as I was passing by. I couldn't stop in time. I heard the big bay bump and crunch that no one ever wants to hear. I cringed and felt awful. I was already running late, so I didn't stop. But for the next 5 miles to work, the tire was bouncing like something was stuck to it. I figured there would be a big mess when I got there. But when I arrived, the tire, the wheel well, everything was spotless, not a single feather. So now I was confused. There were no bumps in the road that could have caused that feeling or that sound. And it wasn't a broken suspension. It went away pretty quickly. Here's where it gets weird. I had forgotten something at home and had to drive back by the same house. As I passed the spot where I hit the chicken, I saw a single chicken on the side of the road, standing about 50 feet away from the others. It wasn't moving at all, just standing perfectly still, staring me down. Its beady little eyes were locked on me, and I swear it felt angry. 10 minutes later, on my way back to work, I passed the house again. That same chicken was still standing there. All the other chickens were gone, and that one was just watching me like some kind of poultry apparition. Maybe it was just another chicken, and the first one wandered off somewhere. But either way, it really freaked me out. Story 12. Don't remember if I've shared this before, but it happened when my husband was sick, and I had to travel to another city to take care of him. He had gone there for work. It wasn't far from where we lived, and he was staying at his uncle's condo. My husband is the type to power through anything. So when he called me and said he needed me, I went. I arrived at the condo and found him asleep in the living room. I gently tried to wake him up and let him know I had arrived. He got up rather quickly, and with his eyes still closed, he began to talk. He said they didn't like him and that they had been hurting him. I asked him who they were, and he said, the ones that stay here. I had no idea how or why he was talking like this because he wasn't awake. And it started to freak me out. I asked again who they were, and he said, the ghosts. I told him there was no such thing as ghosts, but then he got excited and said, they're here. Before I could ask another question, he said the lights would go off to show they weren't happy with me being there. Sure enough, the lights in the living room and the rest of the downstairs area went off. I was just standing there thinking, what is going on? My husband then lay back down and went back to sleep. I stayed the night with him, and he kept talking in his sleep, eyes still closed. He said they pushed him down the stairs and made his clothes fly out of the closet. I tried to sleep, but kept having weird dreams of an Asian family staring at me from the stairs. Finally, morning came. My husband woke up and asked what I was doing there. I said, you called me and asked me to come because you weren't feeling well. He said he didn't remember calling me or anything he had said. It was one of the weirdest nights of my life. I asked him not to stay there anymore, and he didn't. Story 13. My grandma's house is notoriously haunted. Many family members have seen and heard unexplainable things, and the house even has 2 hidden rooms and 1 hidden compartment where the old Italian family who lived there before used to make and store wine during Prohibition. There's also a very old cemetery in her backyard with pioneer and native graves dating back to the 18s. Just to set the scene, I have two stories that happened to me personally in that house. When I was about 12 years old, I was hanging out at my grandma's house after our usual Wednesday family dinner. My mom had taken my sister and cousin to the store, so I was the only kid left in the house. The older ladies were playing cards in the kitchen, and the men were watching the news in the living room. As usual, I was walking from the kitchen into the old kitchen, a room with toys and kids' stuff that used to be the original kitchen. I flipped on the light and saw a girl about my age leaning casually in the doorway, between the old kitchen and the dining room, which was dark and empty. I don't remember her face, but she looked about 10 to 13 years old with brassy blonde hair, thin and shoulder length. She wore a long-sleeved shirt and pants. Nothing old-fashioned or strange. We made eye contact, and then she disappeared right in front of me. I wasn't scared, just curious. When I was 17 or 18, my friend Wendy and I worked the Elks Bingo Hall every Thursday night. Since my grandma lived close to both the hall and our high school, we would stay at her house afterward. She always stocked our favorite snacks. We'd usually get home around 10 to 11 p.m., and every week my grandma would let us in and then go upstairs to bed. Wendy and I had the ground floor to ourselves, perfect for snacks and TV. One Thursday night, I opened the fridge while Wendy stood behind me. As I did, a stern female voice came from the living room and said, "Can I ask you a question?" It might not sound scary, but the tone was absolutely chilling. We didn't say anything at first, just got our snacks. Then, sitting at the table, Wendy asked, "When you opened the fridge, did you hear a voice from the living room?" We weren't playing music or watching TV yet. Snacks came first. Wendy said she heard an older woman's voice but couldn't understand it. I told her what I thought it said. We decided to pretend it didn't happen, since we still had to spend the night there. My grandma has seen several full-body apparitions. My normally stoic and skeptical grandpa once pulled a gun and called the police on a man dressed in all black, running through the house, who then vanished. My sister's best friend once woke up to a dark figure watching her sleep. My cousin Kim heard a woman's voice comfort toddler-aged Emily after a fall. The same voice once said, "God bless you," when Kim sneezed. My grandma believes the house knows when someone is going to pass. If something unusual happens, like a picture falling or an old toy turning on, someone in the family dies soon after. My great-grandma once saw a woman in white pacing in the dining room. She passed away that week. My grandpa, who was a night shift security guard, once complained for a week that a lamp in the living room kept turning on while he showered after work. He died the following week. There are many more stories, but these are the most memorable to me. My grandma still lives there alone. She says the spirits keep her company and that she can still feel my grandpa's presence from time to time, and that brings her peace. Story 14. When I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, we had a nasty snowstorm that knocked out power for several days. We lived in New England, out in the middle of farmland, so while neighbors were within walking distance, it was still a short hike to reach them. I don't remember exactly what led to it, but my mother needed to visit a nearby neighbor to lend them something, while my dad worked on getting the generator running. I wanted to go with her, so she put me on a snow sled and pulled me along. It was dark outside, but the snow created this eerie blue glow. My mom had a flashlight. We reached the neighbor's house. She dropped off whatever they needed, maybe batteries or candles, and then we headed back. The walk was only about a quarter mile, but it went through the woods. About halfway home, we both heard a horrifying scream, like something straight out of a monster movie. The best way I can describe it is the scream the creature makes in Predator when it cauterizes its wound. It echoed through the woods. My mom picked me up off the sled and ran all the way back home. We both described the sound to my dad, but he didn't believe us. A week later, we found a bunch of dead deer, 4 or 5 of them, just 30 feet off a wooded path near our house. They had been torn apart, not by poachers or hunters. I've been around coyotes my whole life, and this wasn't them. Coyotes tear their prey apart and scatter it. These were full-sized deer with large chunks missing and nothing else. Our neighbor, who was an experienced hunter, said he had heard strange sounds as well, but had no idea what could have done something like that. Story 15. I spend a lot of time in the woods hiking. I don't believe in Bigfoot or any unexplained wild animals, but in the moment I fully understood why those stories exist. I was hiking in Georgia, off the Appalachian Trail. It was one of those foggy mornings, so foggy in fact, that early on I walked right into a flock of wild turkeys, which simply does not happen. They were so close I could have touched them with my walking sticks before they took off into the fog. About 15 minutes later, I heard a growl that sounded like it came straight from a nightmare. It growled 2 or 3 times. It almost sounded monkey-like, but way too deep. I've scoured the internet trying to match the sound, but haven't found anything. It caught me completely off guard. I positioned myself between a tree and the direction the sound came from, using my walking stick like a spear and the tree like a shield in case something attacked. I started shouting, like you're supposed to, especially if it's a black bear. That usually works. In that moment, I believed every scary story you hear around a campfire. Fortunately, I eventually heard whatever it was run off. To this day, the logical part of me knows it was probably nothing abnormal, but in that moment, it felt like Bigfoot. If it had been 1975, I could totally see myself going down the rabbit hole, telling everyone about the time I heard Bigfoot in the morning fog. Story 16. Years ago, I was in a PetSmart waiting in the checkout line, which was quite long and stretched down the middle aisle of the store. A young man walked in through the entrance, bypassed about 12 or 15 others in line, and rushed directly up to me. It quickly became clear, from the way he spoke, that he was cognitively different. Right as he reached me, he launched into a story about how he needed help. He wasn't asking for money, and I don't remember all the details, but I distinctly recall him saying he didn't have anywhere to go. It sounded like he was being evicted or kicked out of where he was living. It completely caught me off guard, and I basically told him I was really sorry, but didn't know how to help. He turned around, walked back the same way he came in, and left. He didn't speak to anyone else in that line, just me. I'm not a religious person in the traditional sense, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that I was being tested in that moment by something greater, and that I utterly failed. Story 17. Not the weirdest thing ever, but something strange happened again over the weekend. I've been going through some of my collection, pulling out various items and taking pictures to share with others. I've done this for dozens of items, carefully removing them from their protective covers to photograph them. After finishing another round of photos, I was putting the items back when I noticed something had adhered to one of them. If you've ever used rubber cement, you'll know the texture. When it's old, it becomes a semi-wet mass. That's exactly what was suddenly stuck to the surface of one of my items. I've kept that piece pristine for decades, and now it was stained. I checked the surface I laid it on. Nothing there. I checked the other items I photographed. Nothing on them either. I haven't used rubber cement in decades, so there's no way an old glob of it just happened to be in my home. Here's the unsettling part. About 20 years ago, I had something similar happen. I bought something at a store, and by the time I got it home and took it out of the bag, the box had the same strange, sticky layer on it. Between the store and my house, it just appeared. Story 18. One night last year, I was taking a shower before bed. The glass in the shower door shattered, leaving shards everywhere and me with some cuts, trapped inside with no way to get out without slicing the soles of my feet. Thankfully, my wife heard the crash and helped me out. The shattering itself is explainable. The door had been hanging off the track for months. There must have been pressure on the glass that finally became too much. It was my own fault, but during the hour and a half we spent cleaning up the glass, I realized there had been some strange foreshadowing earlier that evening. While putting my son to bed, he was 5 at the time, he randomly asked me, "Daddy, what are shards?" Also, earlier that week, I had been discussing music with friends. We were talking about the Eurythmics. With that in mind, I was watching some of their music videos that night. About 20 minutes before the shower glass shattered, I was watching the video for Annie Lennox's Walking on Broken Glass. Just before my wife had to bring me my slippers so I could walk safely over the shards. Story 19. One night while my partner and I were spending some time at his parents' home, I was trying to fall asleep but couldn't get comfortable. At one point, I woke up feeling like something was standing by the door and walking across the room toward the bed. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and shined it around the room. Nobody was there. The room is pretty open, but small, so there's really nowhere for someone to hide. The floorboards creak even when stepped on lightly, and I hadn't heard a sound. There was definitely no one in the room. I turned the flashlight off and tried to go back to sleep, but then I felt like something was standing right over the bed, right in my face. I can see fairly well in the dark, especially around the bed, and nothing was visible, so I quickly rolled over, cuddled up to my partner, and hid under the covers. What felt like an eternity passed. I started thinking I was just overreacting, so I loosened the covers and stopped holding my partner so tightly I was still facing him when a wave of unease and terror hit me. Every hair on my body stood up. It was that kind of deep fear you can't explain. Then I felt a pressure on the bed, as if someone sat on the edge. The covers reacted like they were being sat on, and I felt the bed dip slightly, the way it would if someone sat next to you. I looked. Nobody was there. I don't think I've ever held my partner so tightly. Whatever it was felt like it had sat close to my lower back and was facing the wall. Away from us, I was about to panic when I felt the pressure on the bed lift and the presence leave the room. No sound, no visible person. The next morning I told my partner, and we joked that maybe it was one of the relatives from the two urns downstairs. While we were eating breakfast, my partner told his mom that I had a bit of a scare last night. When she asked why, I explained everything. Now, out of all of us, his mom is the biggest skeptic. She always tries to explain things away or jokes about anything paranormal, so I expected her to laugh. But instead, she went pale and gave a nervous laugh. My partner, expecting her usual jokes too, asked what was wrong. She said she was feeling uneasy, because the same thing had happened to her that night as well. She said she woke up and felt someone by the door. Thinking it was my partner's dad coming back from the bathroom, she asked, "Are you okay?" But then she heard him snoring behind her. She tried to shake it off as her imagination, but then she felt someone standing over her. She turned on the bedside lamp. No one was there. She turned it off, faced my partner's dad, and then felt the same pressure on the bed. She said it sat facing away and got up a few minutes later, and the presence left the room. My partner's mom might joke about things, but she wasn't joking that day. She's not the type to scare people just for fun, and she knows I struggle with anxiety and depression. She wouldn't push a joke that far. She was 100% serious. We laugh about it now, but it remains one of the creepiest and most unexplained experiences either of us has had. Story 20. When I was 12 years old, I joined a rock band with my friend, who was 14. He was a prodigy guitarist, and I was just trying to fit in. But I learned a lot and eventually became decent. Anyway, his dad had a full PA system and all kinds of music gear, so we had band practice in his basement. One day we were messing around, listening to some weird cassette tapes his dad had. We put in Kermit's Rainbow Connection and started swaying around like idiots, joking that we should do the song with the band. At the time, we were kid rockers, so it was a total joke. But secretly, we both liked the song. We were playing the music through the PA system, an extremely powerful setup with two huge loudspeakers. Midway through the song, he stopped the tape and was about to put something else in. But then we both paused. The song was still playing, very faintly through the speakers. We looked at the tape deck. It was stopped, but the song was still going. And you know how that song has a dreamy quality to it? That made it really creepy. He took the tape out. The song still played. It was quiet, but definitely audible. We both heard it. Starting to freak out, he unplugged the entire PA system from the power strip. The song was still playing. We sat there frozen, mouths open, listening. After a few long seconds, the song faded out. So slowly we couldn't even tell when it stopped. It just disappeared. We tried for weeks to recreate it, with that song, with others, but it never happened again. And no, we weren't on any substances. We were just two kids in a basement who had one surreal, unexplained moment that still gives me chills. Story 21. Back in 2002, my whole family vacationed at a cabin site on Fair Lake, Michigan, near Kalamazoo. I was only a year old, so I don't have a personal memory of it. But out of the 15 people who stayed with us over the course of the trip, almost everyone had a strange experience. I'll start with the ones that could maybe be explained, and then the ones I can't. Everyone said they constantly felt bad energy and like they were being watched. The lights kept going out during the stay, and someone would always have to go down to the basement to reset the breaker. I personally think it could have been bad wiring in the old cabin, but the frequency was strange. My aunt said she was sleeping when a ghost appeared in front of her, yelling, "Get out!" and even punching her. My mom later said she had been drinking a bit that night, so who knows. My grandpa said he was sleeping in the front parlor, and around early morning saw a prism of light floating outside near the lake. He went out to investigate, but it was gone. Maybe just a sunlight reflection? My uncles, who were in their 20s and 30s, were sleeping outside in a camper. One night they were all woken by something banging hard on the outside. One of them called out, "Yeah, nice try," thinking it was a prank, but all of them replied, "It's not us, man. We hear it too." They sat silently for a few minutes until the pounding stopped. To this day, none of them admit to doing it. Could have been a prank, but it definitely creeped everyone out. Another night, my dad and uncle were inside talking when an interior door slammed shut. My mom says there's no way wind could have done that. It wasn't an exterior door, and it wasn't windy. My dad doesn't like talking about that one. My mom was tucking me and my sister in for the night when she heard a child laughing. It came from another room, and she said it sounded nothing like either of us. One night, my cousin accidentally locked my uncle's keys in his truck. A police officer was called out to help unlock the door. While he was working on it, no one inside the squad car, the emergency lights suddenly turned on. When asked, the officer casually said, "Yeah, weird stuff seems to happen around here." Story 22. Around 15 to 20 years ago, when I was a teenager, probably the weirdest thing in my life happened. I used to live in a small town with a population of about 6,000 people. No airport. The closest city was about 10 kilometers, around 6 miles away. Population around 300,000, with a small airport, but only for helicopters, small propeller planes, and gliders. It didn't even have a concrete runway, just a field. Not fit for airliners or jets at all. The nearest international airport was about 100 kilometers, 62 miles away. The biggest planes I'd ever seen in the area were mosquito fogging aircraft. Airliners to me were just tiny growling dots way up in the sky, like little grains of rice. One afternoon I was with my mom, and we were walking home from somewhere. We ran into one of her friends and stopped so they could chat. I stood next to them, not really paying attention to their conversation. While they were talking, a huge jet plane with turbines flew directly over our heads with a deafening roar, much louder than any fogging plane or helicopter I'd ever heard. It was flying low, like it was about to land, take off, or even crash. Nothing like that had ever happened there before, and it never happened again. The strangest part is that no one reacted. My mom and her friends stopped talking for just a few seconds because they couldn't hear each other over the noise. Then they simply continued chatting. I asked, "Did you see that airplane?" And my mom replied, "Yeah, sure," in a rushed, dismissive way, clearly just wanting to get back to her conversation. Everyone on the street went about their business as if nothing had happened. Maybe 2 or 3 others were nearby, and none of them looked up. There was no crash. Nothing about it was mentioned in the news. Nothing came of it. So I just carried on with my day. It didn't bother me too much at the time, but to this day, I still have no explanation for what I saw. Where did that plane come from? Where was it going? Why was it flying so low over a town with no air traffic? When I ask my mom about it now, she says she remembers the event, but it never struck her as unusual. I'm not an expert in aviation, so maybe there's a totally mundane explanation, and I'd love to hear one. But so far, it remains one of the most bizarre and unexplained moments of my life. Story 23. Our family home was an unremarkable 3-bedroom house on a typical housing estate in England, built in the 1950s or 60s on old farmland. Nothing near a cemetery, no abandoned asylums, nothing spooky like that. Just a normal house. From time to time, my mom would mention hearing someone coming up the stairs at night when everyone was already in bed. She said she'd hear footsteps that would stop once they reached the top of the staircase. My dad, younger brother, and I never heard anything like that, but my younger sister did, and she experienced other things too. We used to share a room, and she'd tell me that, in addition to hearing the someone on the stairs, she could feel a presence sitting on her bed. The mattress would actually dip down. She said something would tug her duvet and sometimes scrabble underneath her bed. The family dog, who sometimes slept in our room, would also react, staring at a fixed point, hackles raised, growling. She said it usually happened when I wasn't home, either away at a friend's or off at university. But one specific incident occurred when I was home. I had done some studying and gone to bed. My sister later told me that when she came into the room, she found me sitting upright in bed, staring directly at her with a huge, unnatural grin on my face. The hallway light was on so she could see me clearly. She described the grin as demonic, like my face was being stretched. She said my name twice. I didn't respond or move, just kept staring at her. Panicked, she closed the door quickly, then reopened it and turned on the bedroom light. I was lying down, sleeping normally. I had no memory of this happening and only heard about it years later. Story 24. When I was 20, I visited a town in Italy known for its medieval towers that you can climb. My girlfriend wasn't interested in climbing any, so I went up one on my own. I was the only person doing so at the time. It was a sunny day when I entered the tower. The stairs wound around the inner edge of the tower. There were no windows on the way up. The climb took maybe 5 minutes. Tops. At the top of the stairs, there was a door leading to the roof. When I opened it, I was shocked. The weather had changed dramatically. The sky was now overcast and threatening. I can't remember if there was thunder or not, but I was genuinely concerned about lightning. I was at the top of a tall stone tower, and it didn't feel safe. The roof had a sort of metal cage of bars surrounding it. As I cautiously stepped out to take a quick look, I saw arcs of electricity jumping between some of the bars. Not a blinding lightning strike, just visible arcing. That was enough. I immediately descended the stairs as quickly as I could. But when I reached the bottom, the weather was once again clear and sunny. My girlfriend could tell I looked shaken. When I told her I thought there had been lightning at the top, she looked surprised. She said the weather hadn't changed at all while I was in the tower. I've started telling this story a few times, but it's always felt too strange to expect people to believe. I have no explanation. I did a bit of Googling later, and I'm 90% sure it was the Torre Grossa in San Gimignano. It doesn't have a full cage around the top, but there is a metal cage around the bells. Maybe that's what I remember seeing. Story 25. When I was 5 years old, my sister and I were in a car accident. She was 16 and very responsible for someone her age. It was summer break in the 90s, and my mom needed my sister to take our van to get new tires. My mom managed a finance office and didn't like taking time off work because everyone depended heavily on her. So instead, my sister took me along with her and her boyfriend, now husband, to get the tires put on. Afterward, we dropped off my brother-in-law and headed back home. My sister hates country music, but I talked her into playing Boot Scootin' Boogie on a cassette tape. The highway we took to get home was known for being dangerous, full of bends and curves. While rounding a particularly sharp one, a truck swerved into our lane, flipping the van over into a ditch. After the impact, the first thing I remember is looking over and seeing my sister, her face and torso covered in blood. She was trying to unbuckle my seatbelt to help me, but she couldn't even hold her head up. First responders found me in the back of the van, screaming for help, trying to get out. They used the jaws of life to extract my sister. The radio was broken during the process because the song had been stuck on repeat, which was starting to freak the responders out. I was taken to a local hospital for observation. My sister had to be airlifted. The family in the truck was moving homes, and tragically, a little boy holding a lamp was killed when it shattered and punctured his neck. That morning, my mom had to get a ride to work from my aunt because we were using the van. She hadn't slept well the night before because she woke up to the sound of chanting coming from the side of her room. She said it sounded like 3 voices all talking in unison saying, "Take a floater and do it yourself." At first, she didn't understand what the voices meant. At her job, employees had the option to take a floater, a weekday off in exchange for working a weekend shift. Hearing those voices frightened her, but she didn't understand what they were trying to tell her. The next morning, she felt sick all day with a massive migraine. Around 4 p.m., she called my aunt to come get her from work because she could no longer function. Before leaving, she called my dad and asked if we had made it home yet. When he told her we hadn't, she said he needed to leave immediately and look for us. As he reached the highway, he saw the entire area blocked off with first responders everywhere. He rushed to a sheriff and told him that it might have been his daughters in the wreck. At that point, they hadn't identified the victims yet and turned him away. A few minutes later, the sheriff came over and apologized, telling my dad it was, in fact, us, and gave him an update on our conditions. It took my mom a long time to forgive herself for not understanding the message she received. If she had taken that floater day, she wouldn't have gone to work, and we wouldn't have been driving home on that same highway. The boy in the truck might have lived, and my sister may not have spent 3 weeks in the ICU. My family has always experienced strange, unexplainable things. My mom has always been sensitive to them. And so was her mother. I experienced a lot of creepy things as a kid, and now that I have a daughter, she seems even more sensitive, especially when she spends time with my mom. It used to scare me a lot. Story 26. I used to work in hotels. One particular hotel I worked at was well known in the local hospitality scene for its paranormal activity. But after a while, you got used to it. The strange things that happened were rarely scary, just weird. When I was first hired, another employee told me that the large ballroom was haunted. I shrugged it off, thinking, yeah, whatever. I was working in housekeeping at the time, so I never had to go near that part of the hotel anyway. Eventually, I switched jobs and became the evening shift janitor. That role included cleaning the public restrooms and locking up at night. We had a week of wedding receptions. The ballroom was big enough to host 2 or 3 smaller events at once, and every night that week, there was at least one party. On Saturday night, one of the receptions had constant issues. Light bulbs blowing out, breakers tripping, equipment malfunctioning. Even the fire alarm went off at one point due to a detector in the ballroom ceiling. I felt bad for the bride and groom, but they had a good sense of humor about it. They even took a photo with the firefighters in front of their truck. Sunday rolled around, the hotel was quiet, and there were no events scheduled. Part of my job was to head over and lock up the ballroom, making sure all the lights were off. Some of the light switches were on the opposite end of the room, so I had to walk through it. As soon as I stepped inside, I just stopped. It sounds cliché, but all the hairs on my arms and neck stood up. The atmosphere felt tense, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I quickly backed out and shut the door. Forget the lights. A few minutes later, the 2 guys from the audio-visual team showed up to prep for a meeting scheduled the next day. They walked in and came right back out. One of them said it felt like something was physically stopping him from walking any further. The other one said he heard something growl, but couldn't understand what it said. Story 27. For my 12th birthday, my mom got a hotel room for me and my friends. We had just come back from the pool when I suddenly got this horrible feeling that something terrible was going to happen. I started crying and freaking out. I was terrified, and this random vein popped out of my forehead, something that had never happened before. Everyone eventually helped calm me down, and we went back into the room to watch TV. Not even an hour later, we were all just chilling in bed when I noticed a huge red splotch, like a few feet wide, on the bed that had appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't anywhere near where any of us had been sitting. Obviously, I started panicking again, and we called our parents. We checked everyone to see if anyone was bleeding. We all checked if anyone had gotten their period or had a cut or scrape, but no one had. No injuries, no bleeding, nothing. There was also nothing red that could have spilled. The weirdest part? The stain looked like it had already dried, but also just appeared out of nowhere. We even checked the vent above the bed. When we started taking off the sheets, we found tiny red spots up near the top of the bed and on some of the pillowcases too. We ended up shoving everything into the closet and using extra blankets that were in the room. I don't think my mom or my friend's mom said anything to the hotel staff. I have no idea what the stain was, or if it was even blood. But at the time, my friends and I were totally convinced the room was haunted. I remember barely getting any sleep that night. Story 28. Not really creepy, but definitely strange. When I was about 14, I saw a UFO. a literal unidentified flying object. My parents and I were part of a larger group doing a 3-week kayaking trip down a small river in the Ural Mountains. One night, we camped near a lake. A few of us kids stayed up late by the campfire, while all the adults went to sleep. That's when we saw it. A very large object rose from behind the trees across the lake. It lifted into the air on what looked like 4 rocket engines. Then it tilted sideways, kind of like a quadcopter, and flew off behind the tree line. One thing that surprised me was that the exhaust was pure white, no yellow or red, and it left a glowing trail in the air that stayed visible for 10 to 15 minutes after it was gone. We told the adults the next morning. At first, they didn't believe us. Pranks were pretty common on these trips, but we were adamant, so they agreed to ask some locals the next time we passed through a village or town. There was nothing about it in the newspapers or on the radio. This was before TV was common in Ural villages. But some locals confirmed that people see things like that a few times a year. One of them said, "It's better not to ask too many questions, and definitely don't look at it too closely." This was in 1988 or 1989. The USSR was still standing, but clearly declining. We all understood that it was best not to make too much noise about what we saw. To this day, I believe it was some kind of experimental military or aerospace craft. But we'll probably never know for sure. All of us who were there that night are in our 40s now, and we still remember that moment like it just happened. Story 29. This isn't my story, but it was told to me by my grandpa after my grandma passed away. We were just sitting around sharing memories, laughing, and remembering the good times. Then he told us something we had never heard before. It happened back when my parents were still kids. My grandma was in the kitchen doing dishes when she heard a noise behind her. She turned around and saw someone walking through the kitchen, not running or rushing, just calmly walking straight through, seemingly unaware of their surroundings, just walking. She went into the living room and said to my grandpa, "I think I just saw a monk." At the time, the internet already existed, and since my grandpa worked in tech, they had a computer with access. They did some research and found out that directly underneath their house, right under the kitchen, there had once been underground tunnels used by monks to travel to the local church. This is just a story from my grandpa. And yeah, it could be made up, but I don't see any reason why he would invent something like that, especially during such a personal moment. Sometimes I remember it randomly, and it still gives me chills. Story 30. I was tripping on acid with 3 friends on a golf course late at night. There were 4 of us, and only one of us was sober, which is how I know this really happened. This wasn't unusual for us. We'd often take nighttime walks through that course. It was in a wooded area with no homes nearby, quiet, secluded, perfect for us. We had been out for a couple of hours, and it was around 2 a.m. when I really started to feel the trip. We found a nice green on a kind of peninsula surrounded by a creek, and we decided to sit there, talk, and watch the stars. I was standing off to the side chatting with our sober friend, while the other 2, my buddy and his wife, were squatting by the water, checking out the moon's reflection about 15 feet away. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my friend stand up straight like he was scared. He said, "Hey, there's a guy." I turned and looked across the water. Leaning against a tree about 20 feet away was a man, just standing there. He looked like he was in his 40s. Overweight, no shirt, no shoes, just standing there with his arms crossed, staring directly at us. We yelled at him, asked what he was doing out there. Let me remind you, we were in the middle of nowhere. Texas, there should not have been anyone out there. He didn't answer. He just started walking toward us. At that moment, I genuinely thought, we're going to have to defend ourselves. Like, why was he there? Was he following us? For how long? Our sober friend had already sprinted off without saying a word. The rest of us ran too. We didn't look back. This was a few years ago, and I still think about that man often. I just want to know who he was and why he didn't say anything. The hair on the back of my neck still stands up every time I think about it. Story 31. I was about 10 years old and my sister was 14. My dad was driving us and our siblings home from somewhere. I honestly can't remember where. My sister and I had to use the restroom, so he stopped at a Target located in a somewhat unsafe area. We ran into the bathroom alone while my dad and the others waited outside. As soon as we walked in, we heard a woman whispering, but it sounded like she was speaking in another language. I assumed she was talking to a child in the stall, or maybe on the phone. We went into separate stalls and started to pee, but the whispering gradually got louder and louder until it turned into yelling. This woman started screaming, "Die, you're going to die with blood! Die with blood!" My body froze. I was paralyzed with fear. I thought that if I screamed or told my sister to run, she'd try to hurt us. With pee still dripping, I pulled up my pants and ran out of the stall crying, with my sister also crying, following close behind. We told our dad everything right there outside the bathroom. He told us to run to the customer service area and get security while he stood by the bathroom door to make sure no one left or entered. Security arrived and checked every stall in the restroom. They came out and said, "The restroom is clear. Nobody is in there." It's been 12 years since that day, and I still can't go into a public bathroom without feeling terrified. Story 32. When I was 16 years old, I drove into the city to see a movie. I spent about half an hour driving around, trying to find parking, until I finally found a dimly lit spot under a bridge. There were maybe one or two other cars nearby, and not a single person in sight. I got out, expecting to use my card at the meter, but it only accepted coins. Not sure if I had any change, I leaned into the passenger side door to check the console. After finding a few quarters, I turned around and suddenly noticed three guys standing just a few feet from me. The one in the middle had a pale complexion and two teardrop tattoos under his right eye. He was also the first to speak. He asked, "Are you 18? Let me just say, I was a short, skinny guy at the time, full of social anxiety. Talking to strangers wasn't exactly my strength, but in that moment I somehow managed to respond calmly. "Nah, man." Apparently that was enough. The trio just turned and walked away. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had said yes. Story 33. There was this girl I was seeing at the time, and we needed to have that talk. You know the one. We decided to go to this statue located in a college town nearby. It's a spot where students usually hang out, climb on the statue, take pictures. Typical college kid stuff. It was about 30 minutes out, in the middle of farmland. I don't know much about the statue's origin, but it's a well-known and seemingly safe place. We headed out around 1 a.m. It was pitch black outside, and you could see the stars clearly. When we got there, I immediately got a bad feeling, but we still walked to the statue anyway. It was about a 5-minute walk from the gravel parking area. After taking a quick look, we decided to head back to the car because it was dark and cold. I kept the engine running and backed into the spot so I could face the small road and keep an eye out. About 10 minutes into our conversation, I noticed a large white SUV, looked like an Escalade, driving past us. I didn't think much of it at first. It was the only vehicle we'd seen all night. It drove about a quarter mile down the road, then suddenly did a 3-point turn, odd but not alarming. Then it came back and turned right onto a small road directly in front of us. I figured maybe the driver had missed a turn. Still no big deal. But then, about a quarter mile down that road, the SUV did another 3-point turn, and this time stopped maybe 100 feet away from us, headlights blazing directly at my compact sedan. That's when I got really uneasy. Moments later, the SUV slowly pulled into our gravel lot and positioned itself in a way that blocked the only entrance and exit. At this point, all my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The girl I was with wanted to keep talking and brushed it off, saying the guy was probably just acting weird. But I wasn't taking chances. I squeezed my car out of the lot and back onto the road. And sure enough, the SUV immediately began tailing me. Now I was panicking. I told her to call the police. But of course, we had no signal. Middle of nowhere. So I floored it. I was going over 120 miles per hour on a narrow country road, surrounded by nothing, and he was still right behind us. The road was straight and empty for about 15 miles, and we kept going. Eventually, we started approaching signs of civilization. There was an intersection with some other cars, and I felt a tiny bit of relief. I figured maybe that would be enough to make him stop. Just to test him, I turned on my left blinker and started to veer like I was going to turn, but then floored it and went straight instead.